Cool. So before we get started, let me just quickly share some of the house rules and before we also introduce everyone. So my name is Shifumi. I'm one of the co-founders of Collab. And just to share some of the house rules, like I mentioned, we do record our events. So, by attending, you definitely grant consent. So we'll be recording everything that's happening so we can actually post it later. We encourage you to engage in the live chat. If you do have any questions or if you have any thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat, engage with one another. Feel free to share your takeaways online and feel free to tag us whenever you like showcase your learnings. We also welcome you to connect with one another. We will have a networking portion of the event later on in the last 20 minutes. So we'll put you on the breakout rooms. We ask that you try to have fun and be respectful. A little bit about Collab and what we do. So we're an online school, our remote program that helps career switchers who are trying to break into the industry for the very first time. And we do that by providing people with more experience, building products in cross-functional teams. We've graduated over 500 students, and we like to make our students feel confident and prepared for the workplace. And we can now find some of our alumni at amazing companies like Microsoft, Apple, and many more, as well as startups across the world. So we're super happy to be bringing you these set of free events where you can sort of learn from industry leaders. And I'm so happy to introduce our first guest today, or our guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience? And sort of share a little bit more information about who you are, and then we'll sort of get into the event.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Aniththa. People also call me Annie. I'm currently a TPM at Amazon, and I have a background in computer science and finance from Waterloo. I'm definitely excited to be here and meet you all today and looking forward to this talk.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. I'm excited to chat more about your experience, product management, what it means to build products with machine learning and AI, and the amazing gems and knowledge that you'll be sharing with us today. So let's just start very simple. I know a lot of our audience are aspiring product managers. So would you like to just share with us a little bit how you broke into product management for the first time? I know you mentioned you have a computer science background. How did that lead you into product management? What piqued your interest, and how did you eventually make that transition?
Yeah, I guess for me, product management just happened. I was actually at my last co-op term at Deloitte. So Waterloo has this awesome co-op program, and I was doing my last one at Deloitte as a consultant, so business technology analyst at the title. And I actually got an opportunity from Microsoft for a full-time offer for a software engineer role. So they were actually looking to hire someone, and I was actually going through my first round of interviews. And when I was talking about my experience, they said that, hey, you seem to be a better fit for a PM role. And that's how I actually got introduced to what a product manager is at the time. And from there, I just went ahead and cracked the PM interview and landed my first full-time at Microsoft.
Cool, awesome. And as you reflect on even that interview experience, what about you made them feel like you were better suited for product management over software engineering?
Yeah, so being at Deloitte as a consultant, I was actually trying to solve a specific client problem. And I was able to translate that skill set to a product manager of saying that hey, there's a product and I would want to solve a customer or a user's problem in this case. And that's how those skill sets were just very similar. So I was able to talk about that experience, which made it seem like, hey, I would be more suitable for a product manager. And I also enjoyed talking, understanding customer problems, and communicating that. So that's just my skill set just lined up. And so I went ahead with the PM opportunity.
Cool. Did you have any reservations about product management before, or how did it feel having that transition, given that it was something new than what you applied for, what you interviewed for?
Yeah, truthfully, when I got to Microsoft for the first time, I didn't really know what to expect. I knew what a PM does and all, but actually doing the job and reading about it is very different. So I was guided throughout the process of figuring out what it's like to be a PM, especially working on my first product. And it was an incredible learning opportunity for sure. And yeah, so definitely experiencing something was very different from just cracking that PM interview. So enjoyed it, and that's why I'm still continuing that track.
Awesome, great. And I'm happy to talk about the interview experience a little bit. it's very difficult sometimes doing product management interviews if you have no experience. So how did you crack the PM interview, given that you hadn't done product management before? How were you able to sort of like navigate some of those things? How did you interview prep? Any things to share with the audience around that area?
Yeah, so I was 100% preparing for like a engineer role at the time. So I was trying to like figure out how to code and stuff like that. But then I really had to translate that. And one of my supporting I guess things that I used to support myself was like the How to Crack a PM Interview book. It literally walks you through what the process is like, what it's like at different companies, what your resume should look like, what is like a behavior question, what would that be like? So like I really use that to help myself. And then I also reached out to my network. I tried to find people who work at Microsoft and see what it's like to be a PM there. And just talking to those people actually like gave me an idea of what I could expect, and just practicing interviews, finding a buddy and just practicing with them and going through some mock interviews really helped me get to cracking that actual interview. So yeah.
So congrats, and it's great to see that you're enjoying the role. So now you're a senior technical product manager at Amazon. What is that like? Could you just tell us more about your role at Amazon and what you do?
Yeah, so I actually just very recently started this role, probably in June. And yeah, so what I'm working on right now, I'm in the supply chain optimization technology org, and specifically working on demand forecasting. So I am in the ML space. And just to give you more details on what we do is that we're looking at like all the products across Amazon. There's tons of them. And I'm actually trying to help forecast how much of those products we should have in hand at like these fulfillment centers at a regional level, country level. What about when there's like a new market forming? How many products should we have? So definitely an interesting space. I'm still learning, fairly new, but enjoying it for sure.
Wow, that sounds like a very difficult problem. When you think about machine learning and AI, even just for myself, it's a lot about, how do you do your best to predict the future? And it's a huge responsibility, and it seems like a fun problem to solve. So I can imagine how like exciting. Could you, share what your learnings have been, even just as a product manager so far? I know you said you've just started, recently, but I'm sure you've learned a ton. Is there any form of learnings that you can share with us today about what you've learned so far?
Yeah, especially in like being a PM and just a non-ML space itself, there's like several flows that you would processes that you will follow. Like first of all, understanding that customer problem, just knowing that you're going to be advocating for like a customer. So that's one of the major like takeaways I would say that I've learned from that. Like there's understanding the ML is a whole new area. So you want to make sure you understand like ML processes, how that works, understanding the customer data to making sure, what is a good model. And so like there's definitely like flows that you would need to understand. Being in the ML space, I would have to say that I'm not an ML expert, especially for this talk. I definitely just got the opportunity to work in that space. So at both like Microsoft, Apple, or Amazon, I'm just working in the ML space. So you just learn that it's fairly different at different companies, but you just need to like work with the various stakeholders, understand how they follow certain processes, and just go ahead and bring in your own brand and work on products.
Cool, awesome. And then what do you do, or how do you go about trying to understand from those stakeholders, especially for people who maybe might not have a technical background? Imagine working on an ML product or an AI product. What is the best way, and how do you think that they should approach understanding the stakeholders, understanding the technology, and not being too overwhelmed or scared, if I must say, about doing or playing around with such technologies or building products with that technology?
Yeah. So I think for me, when I entered the space, I didn't really have a strong ML background. One thing I did is I did take some relevant courses in the ML space just to understand the basics of ML. Talk to various individuals and see how they learned. Like let them like just do a knowledge share with like other PMs on your team or other engineers on your team. Figure out what the product is trying to do by understanding that like customer expectation. Talking directly to the customer is one way, or talking to other stakeholders within your team who have already found that information is another thing that you could do. So I literally had like one is just self-learning, sitting down and taking courses. Another thing is just talking to my teammates and like coworkers to figure out how they learned and like just doing that knowledge share. So that really supported me. And for me in the ML space, how I lucked out is that when I was at Microsoft, I actually got to work on a tool called Auto ML. So the whole idea here is looking at the traditional machine learning process. You'll need to first, when you have an ML problem, you'll bring in your data. You'll need to choose your algorithm, tune your hyperparameters, and figure out what is your best model by iterating on this process. But I built a technology which automated that entire process. So I understood the ML because of this whole technology. And that's how I learned my ML. So it was super helpful. And then now I'm able to take that out to my other roles.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, actually segues me perfectly to the next question that I wanted to ask you, because now you're at Amazon. Before you were at Apple, you also worked at Microsoft, all as product managers. Let's even start with Microsoft. What did you? I know you just mentioned what you worked on, but was that the most impactful product that you worked on, or could you talk about another project that was ML related that you found that was very interesting to work on or very challenging that you can share with us today?
Yeah, I think another interesting area that I worked on was something called many models. So the idea here is that instead of building a single machine learning model, building multiple models. And we had customers who wanted to build like thousands, even millions of models in parallel, and being able to figure out how to build that technology was definitely interesting and impactful. And I think before I left that team, we were able to train like 1 million models with the customer. So I thought that was definitely exciting, and seeing that large scale of impact was really cool.
Cool. And what were you training those models for? Was it just the sheer size of it, or the sheer challenge of building that many models, or what was the use case, or what was the customer problem that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so this really depends customer to customer. So we, like at Microsoft, what I was doing is building an ML solution. And what we did is like, we have customers from various sectors, let it be retail, finance, healthcare. They all come with their own types of problems, and we go ahead and help them build solutions using this Auto ML tool with many models.
Awesome. Wow, that sounds very powerful. It's kind of like a plug and play type of thing. Cool. So what would you say, after working at like three of arguably some of the biggest tech companies in the world, what would you say is like your biggest takeaway or your learning after working? And then it could be like ML related, or even just generally like as a PM. What would you say taken away from your career from that experience?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway is just like, I know like a company has a vision, but then when you're working at companies like this, they have like several projects, several teams, and then all of those individual teams have their own set of visions. So I guess when you're finding opportunities and stuff, it's important to make sure that one, your vision, your career goals line up with the company. Secondly, you want to make sure it lines up with that individual team. And like, these teams do function sometimes like a startup, especially when I was working at like Auto ML, for example, at Microsoft. It was a fairly new idea at the time. So like the way they were functioning is just like a startup. So making sure there are several opportunities out there, making sure it just lines up with your career goals is very important, is what I've taken away from working at these companies.
Cool. That's very helpful to share. I like the fact that you mentioned being aligned with your goals, because I know a lot of people like just job search and just want to be a PM anywhere, but I think it's important to realize and recognize that it's also has to fit into your goal or your life mission, and I think being clear about some of those, I think that's super important. So there are a lot of products out in the world, and not all of them have ML. Some of them do. What do you think? In your experience, what ways has products that have machine learning or AI like have improved the customer experiences like in products? For someone who's not necessarily familiar, or do you? Yeah. So I'm curious. I'm curious about the thought there.
Yeah. So yeah, just disclaimer, I'm not an ML expert, but things that I've noticed personally is like, start off like, it creates like this customized experience for the user. Like ML provides the opportunity to collect all this data about customers and the individual, so we can know the user behavior. So now with ML in place, you're able to create this experience for the customer that's customized for that individual. And I guess like a good example of this is like Netflix, for example. You'll notice after watching a couple movies, it's actually recommending the movie that you actually want to watch. So having that personalized connection to a product makes you want to use it more. And I personally would rather use a product that's tailored to me versus for generalized. So that's one of the major things. Another thing I could think about is just like it's helping with like decision making. The data you could use to figure out like trends and stuff, quickly identify problems and like actually act on it for your application or something. And then the final space I think I could touch base on right now is just like how it could improve the productivity of your user. It's basically like streamlining the workflow of whatever product you're using. And so it is debatable whether ML is taking away jobs, but that's not something I want to touch base on today, but it definitely improves the productivity of the user. And a good example of this is like chatbots. We don't really notice it, but ML is in place there as well. So it's just creating that experience for you without even knowing that ML is there.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the different things that you touched upon, like the personalized experience, being able to tailor that experience so like customers are able to benefit from the products more by having that AI ML component. And you also touched on productivity as well. I think that those pillars are very interesting when it comes to, even making any product like today. So thanks for sharing. What challenges come with choosing to build products with ML and AI? I think one thing that I can actually think of is, I think the prerequisite to having a product or using ML AI is having a lot of data. But what other challenges come with trying to build like an interesting model or a product that can improve your personalization or your productivity? Like, what challenges have you found in your years of experience building products with machine learning?
Yeah, I think you hit the point right away. Data is probably the biggest issue. And this actually starts off, I've noticed this at like all companies I've worked at, especially working with various customers. I've noticed that like the biggest problem here is collecting the data. Where is this data coming from? There is a lot of data flowing through every organization, but how do you know what is the right amount of data? What should the data look like? Secondly, you want to make sure that data is representing the machine learning problem correctly. You don't want to generalize it too much, or else it's not going to solve the problem. Often you'll notice there's like missing values. So how would you impute that? A lot of these issues just formulate around the data. I think another issue is just like model performance. You will notice like you would want to ask like, how good does a model need to perform for you to know this is the best model? How often should you retrain your model? So there's like data issues, and then comes the training issues. And then I think the final common theme I've noticed is just when you go to deploying your models, your machine learning solution, how do you take it to production? How often should you retrain that model? So like these kind of questions are often asked, and like common themes I've noticed across various organizations of how to solve it. Obviously, I don't have the solution to any of these, but it's just common themes that are out there.
Interesting. So do you think, if you're at a small company or a startup, you can have some of the benefits of building an AI product, or do you feel like it's best reserved for companies with lots of resources? What are your thoughts there, given the challenges that you've just mentioned?
Yeah, this very much depends on the product that is being tried to build. It's always good to keep in mind that ML is not perfect, but if the product is going to, like, using ML is going to improve the user experience, if it's helping make a decision, or if it's improving a process that a non-ML approach can potentially not do, definitely considering using ML is okay. Large or small company, you would be able to find that relevant data. It just definitely takes time. It's not as easy as just bring your data, train your model, and magic happens. So knowing that a lot of time and effort is required, and you need to understand what's going on behind the scenes, is very important.
Cool. Here's an interesting question. If you had to even just break down ML or AI and try to explain it to someone that's like an 8-year-old, how would you go about trying to like describe the power or the benefits of using AI to build products?
Yeah, I think to break it down, I guess, is like, let's just say you have a problem that you want to solve. Let's take something simple for this example. Like, let's just say you want to figure out whether something is like a food item you could still keep if it's expired or not expired. And this is like a classification problem. What you would need is relevant data for that food. So like you will need to figure out like when was that food made? Like you need data about this item. You would need to know how many other items you have in stock, how often does it go bad, and like you need that kind of information about that data. So once you have that data, you're going to go ahead and train it. And what we mean by training is actually trying to figure out like, what is this optimized model here? So figuring out the result of this is trying to figure out whether the item is actually expired or not. And machine learning basically does everything that you would do in your like mind. For example, just looking at the product and saying that, hey, it's expired because of the date. It's able to figure that out for you by doing all this work behind the scenes for you. So the idea here is that it's definitely with the data, all the historical data, it's able to provide you with insights that you would rather do on your own automatically or manually.
Cool, awesome. This is a very great way of like explaining it. So what are your favorite like products that have like AI or ML built with it? I'm curious if you could share with us. Just any product that you use like in day to day.
Yeah, I think many people will say this is Spotify. And particularly because of like, as soon as you open that app, you'll notice how like everything is tailored to you. That whole personalization topic that I touched on earlier, you see it within this app. And like, for example, their Discover Weekly, all the songs or like whatever is recommended there is tailored to me. Like this is something that I would actually want to listen to. And then something else that I find cool about Spotify is that they collect a lot of data, but they actually tell you about it. So if you notice at the end of the year, there's something called Unwrap or Wrapped Up, where they tell you like, hey, these are the top songs you listen to. They're not just collecting that data for themselves, they're actually giving it to the user, and the user is actually celebrating this. If you notice, they'll be posting it on their social media and stuff. So I find that like they're doing ML in the background, but they're actually sharing it with the user, and the user is actually enjoying it. So it's like a win-win situation for both Spotify and the user. So it's quite cool.
Cool, awesome. I know Greg is in the chat saying like, Spotify recommends good tunes for his as well. So if you're curious about, I'm actually curious about your favorite like products that do a lot of personalization. So if you could put that in the chat, that would be super exciting. Here's just like an interesting question, because I think about it and it makes sense the way you've explained it. But how does Spotify do that? Like, how do they know that this song, there's going to be another song that you like, even though they're made by two different artists? Like how do they spit that information back to you? How do they compute that and let you know that you might like this artist? If you could kind of like source out or break down or explain to me.
Yeah, I definitely don't know the secrets behind what Spotify does, but I think high level, what they're doing is they kind of like follow your listening patterns, what kind of albums you're listening to, what kind of artists you're following, and all of this information is being sent to them. This is like relevant data to them. And then they're using that data to train the model to figure out like, what else can I recommend to this individual user? So it's just, again, this recommendation system using the data that you are producing as a user and giving it to Spotify.
Awesome. Very cool. Do you have any other, if you could give another example outside of Spotify, what example would you give? I'm curious if there are others that.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this earlier, but Netflix is something that everyone uses. You'll see right away how like it's recommending movies for you, very similar to like Spotify. I think another one that I noticed recently is when I was driving from like Toronto to New York. I noticed like back in the day, they used to have tolls where you need to actually like pay them manually, but now it's just automatically getting mailed to your house. So like machine learning is in place there, but you just don't notice it, right? It's just some things are just automatically happening behind the scenes. So yeah, it's just everywhere at this point. You just need to pay a little more attention to it.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. So now, given that use case, do you think every product today should have some form of personalization or like machine learning aspect to it?
Yeah, I think this really depends. Like if it's gonna improve that user experience, for sure, you could consider using machine learning. If it's gonna like provide some sort of like relevant data to make a decision, like for the user, yeah, for sure, you could add machine learning. And if it's like improving the process like that ML couldn't do, or non-ML approach couldn't do previously, definitely, yeah. ML could definitely solve it, but again, debatable, product to product, it depends. But you do see it here now, like in every industry, so it's everywhere.
Cool. Also, it's very interesting that you said that, because now that I think about it, like if it improves the experience, we're talking about user experience. So personalization sort of improves user experience. Decision making sort of improves productivity, and that's sort of like how we can translate the user problem to how the technology is solving the user problem, if I'm understanding correctly.
That's right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, I'm learning a lot as well from this talk. So I've not really worked on machine learning products. So it's really cool and fascinating to be hearing a lot of those things. So what best practices do you follow as a PM who's like building AI and ML? I bet it's different from just like building any random SaaS product or any product that is just very single player mode, not collecting a lot of data. What best practices would you follow as a PM
Yeah.
regarding
I think this depends on what stage you're joining a product or like a team. So if the product's already built, one thing that I would recommend when you're a new PM is like actually try out the product, see how it works. And that's how I understood like the first team that I joined at Microsoft, like the AutoML, how it works. So I actually tested it out, played with it to understand what is this, what are they trying to build. If it's a completely net new product when you're starting on a project like from scratch, understand the customer experience. What is it that the user needs? At the end of the day, you're actually like being a customer advocate. You should be obsessed with the customer, right? So just remember that when you're communicating everything to the engineer, you want to keep the customer in mind. So understanding those requirements definitely helps. So like these are just common processes you follow. Now, when you're working with like an ML specific problem as a product manager, what I would recommend is actually understanding data. What does the data look like? How should it look like? And one thing that I've noticed when I worked in these ML spaces is that you're always working closely with like a data science team, whereas in the traditional non-ML space, you would only work with like the engineers, the customer, and like maybe designers. But here you work with like the data scientists. So you want to make sure that you could actually like communicate the customer requirements to the data scientist and also get that information back from the data scientist and communicate that back to engineers and the customers. So like forming those relationships and understanding that like you have the data scientists there to back you up and understand the ML is something that's awesome. But yeah, so like those are some of the common processes that I follow and that I've noticed across the various teams that I worked at.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting that you say that because those are pretty much the foundations of product management. Period. Being able to understand the stakeholders that you work with, communicate with them effectively, spending time with them. So I guess that also translates into the project that you're working on. So I feel like that is inspiring to hear that if you're a good product manager in whatever space that you're in right now, whether that's SaaS or services, that you can actually take a lot of those transferable skills into this new space as long as you're willing to learn, as long as you're
Exactly.
willing to grow. So there is hope for me and and other people. So thanks for sharing. Anything else that you feel that you would like to call out or maybe slightly different? Like maybe yes, is there anything else that you'd say you add outside of just the communication, the stakeholder management, that you feel like it's very integral to be able to build a successful ML product?
Yeah, I think just understanding the entire ML process, like if you have zero knowledge of how ML works, that's totally fine. You could always learn on the job. You could take relevant courses and stuff, but like understanding that process and the entire flow is very important, just so that you know like what is going on, where the product's sitting. And then like you don't really need to understand if the model is performing well or not. The data scientist in your team could actually help you figure that out. What you need to do is like as a PM, help with the execution. If there's any blockers, if you don't have enough data, where do you get that from? So you're going to help with the execution. So understanding that flow, you will know like what are the missing pieces of the ML flow. So like, yeah, so just making sure you understand the process is very important, and then everything else will just fall into place.
Awesome, cool. Going back to even like working at some of these big tech companies like Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, how have you seen like your coworkers think differently about ML or AI products, or what practices do they all stick to? I know you mentioned like yours, but is there like a standard industry standard when it comes to building products, especially at the scale of these big, large companies?
Yeah, so I can't really speak for my peers, but high level, like I noticed the way the teams are structured is very similar. Like there's always like a data team, there's like an ML team who's helping with like the training processes, and then at the end of like when we're going to like deploying the models, there's a team who helps with like deployment or taking models to production. So teams are structured a specific way. I mentioned this earlier, how there's always a science team involved. So they are there to guide you with all the ML. So again, you don't need to always understand what's going on. There are people there to help you find answers to those questions. Yeah, so like high level, that's basically it, how the teams are structured and stuff. And you can always learn on the job. So that's very key.
Oh, cool, awesome. I like the reassurance of you can always learn on the job. People shouldn't be too intimidated. And if I might ask, were you intimidated initially when you were working in the ML space, and how did you overcome that if you ever felt that way?
Yeah, for sure. I was definitely very scared. And like I didn't really know what was going on, and I didn't know if the space was for me. And what's really important is like once you understand what's going on, you will feel like yes, more comfortable, and like you'll enjoy the space more. So like making sure you take the time to learn is very important in any role. That's the only way you could like actually do well and be successful and build successful products. So yeah, learning is very key, especially at the initial stages of joining any team.
Awesome, the continuous learning. Yeah, I think that's why product management is like one of the best jobs, in my opinion, in tech, because you get to learn and the learning never stops. And if you have that drive to learn, people around you teach you, and you can just continue to stay on top. So for folks who are even just like trying to break into product management period, what advice would you give people, if they want to like start from scratch, or if they want to like, transition into a product management role from somewhere else in the industry within the next year? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, 100% join collab. That's one way. Yeah, so like finding opportunities where you could actually build those relevant experiences is very important, especially when you're like building your resume. You want to have that relevant skill set. You don't necessarily need to be a product manager or like an engineer to dive into product management, but doing work or like tailoring your skill set to be a product manager is very important. So like programs like Collab, for example, you actually get to like get that real experience. You work with the team of engineers, designers, have that real experience to talk about. If you don't build a successful product at the end of the day, you get that relevant experience. So like take opportunities like that for sure. And then another way is like if you're already doing something, why you could always like jump to another opportunity within your company. It's definitely one of the easier ways than just directly trying to find a PM role outside. So that's something I recommend sometimes. And also just continuously like build projects on your side, find teams and like work on projects so that you have that relevant skill set. So just a couple of things that I would personally do to break into PM.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for the shout out. Really do appreciate you and sort of like your involvement with Collab and the advice that you're giving folks. And for PMs who are trying, maybe people already existed PMs or they're early in their career and they want to start building products with ML or AI, what advice would you sort of like give them to like get started and all of that?
Yeah, I think key thing is just making sure you understand like is ML actually relevant for this particular project. You don't want to force something into a product just because of fancy terms, right? So yeah, so just understanding the product and the product goals and the customer is very important. Understanding ML processes is very important as well. So take the relevant courses, it will be worth it, it'll pay off at the end of the day. So yeah, just taking those courses to build those products. And then like working with various stakeholders, like finding like a data scientist or maybe even an engineer to collaborate with to build these products is very important. So as a PM, you are required to work with multiple stakeholders. You are basically bridging the gap between the customer expectations and like the engineering decisions. So being there, you want to also help bridge the ML gap as well. So add that data scientist to that flow as well. And yeah, you could build a successful product.
Cool, awesome. And just like one more question before we sort of like open it up for folks in the audience who have questions for you. I know there's one question in the chat. So if anyone else has any question, feel free to just add it and then we'll start to do that before we go into networking. So now as you reflect on your career, and again, thank you so much for walking us through some of the things that you built, some of the insights that you've given to the audience. As you reflect on your career and you think about the things that have allowed you to grow in the product management skills, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways or the top 3 learnings for you? And yeah, so and would you like to like share that with us today?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway is just finding mentors. Like especially when I said I was very new to the machine learning space, the PM space when I started at Microsoft. I actually found mentors very early in my career who helped like empower me as an individual. They guided me throughout the process of what it's like to be a PM, what is ML, and like people like that is very important because just staying in touch with them will help you find other opportunities. And sometimes you just need that person to say, you got this. So those are the kind of mentors you want to find. And it's important to seek mentorship. Mentors won't find you. So make sure you look out for those kind of individuals. And they will play a key role in your career throughout the process. So that's there for me. And then I think another thing is just being customer obsessed. I think as a PM, you want to always think for the customer. You're building these products for the customer. So I've learned that whatever team or product I'm working on, in the end of the day, I need to be like thinking about the customer and building these products for them. So making sure that's in mind. And finally, just like being interested in the product or the space you're working in is very important. If you don't feel interested, you won't be able to contribute that much. You won't be driven to support a product, or you're just doing it because you need to, right? So making sure you find an area of technology or whatever it is that you are passionate about or you enjoy working on is very important, especially knowing that we spend a lot of time with our jobs, right? So you want to work in an area that you enjoy and that you are actually like passionate about, like empowering the end customer. So yeah, I guess those are my 3 takeaways. And that's why I decided to continue with like the ML space, because I know what's happening. There's lots going on there, and it's just very relevant to me. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. So mentorship, find mentors. They wouldn't find you. I think that's important. You definitely also touched on like learning. Learning is like huge because like it never stops, and being very interested in the space that you're in. Again, you alluded to that in the beginning when you talked about find a place and find a role that will help you in your career growth. So I appreciate you sharing some of those things that have allowed you to grow. So really do appreciate it. So now we'll move on to the audience question before we sort of like go into the networking portion. We have the first question from Sam Chen, who says, how long does it take? I'm actually curious about this. This is a very good question, so thanks so much for asking it. How long does it take to develop a model like the Spotify's recommendation system? You know, what size? So I know you don't know. I know you didn't work with Spotify, but what would you say is your best guess to get it to the level where it's like this good?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the product and what type of ML problem you're trying to solve. And like I guess like the type of problem that Spotify solving is fairly large. I have no idea. I can't really estimate how long it takes for them, but I would say that it just depends on how quickly you can collect the data. With apps like Spotify, they are able to get that relevant information because they have a lot of daily active users, right? So they could get the data on an ongoing basis. And then like figuring out what's a proper model for them. They probably have that in place now because they've been working on the product for a while, but like when you're starting fresh, obviously it'll take some time figuring out what is like a good performing model. So all of that, like the entire flow will have its own time. If you have like a strong team, you could do that very quickly. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes it'll take maybe a year. It just depends on what company you're working for and like how quickly they deliver. So yeah, I can't really touch base on Spotify though.
Also, but if you think about it, so if you are starting a new music streaming app from scratch and you wanted to get the recommendation as good as the level of Spotify, you know, given unlimited resources, I guess we can't say given unlimited resources, but how long would you think it would take you to like spin up a team, you know, start, if the data is there, but you need to like clean it, train it, build the model, how long would that take on average? I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say maybe like if we have a very strong, maybe even like 6 months, like possibly, if we have the right amount of data, that is. If the data is there, you could definitely go ahead and build something, but you will need to have a very strong team. But again, it could also take longer. It might take less. I can't really say, it just depends on the team you're working with. Yeah.
Well, that's reassuring, you know, instead of like, you know, it'll take something like 3 years or something like that.
Maybe times when you kick off, it might, if you don't have that data, like what's key here is that you have the relevant data and it's in a very good form. So yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's cool. Another question from Minashi. Can you throw some light on the security and privacy aspects that are managed, or how the security and privacy aspects are managed in like AI and ML solutions? I think that's also another good question because when it comes to data, there's a lot of like privacy stuff in there. So could you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I think one thing I've noticed when I worked at Microsoft, at least, one thing that is key is that like whenever they're using data, they're not actually looking at the individual user information. They're looking at the metadata, like what are the features look like and stuff like that. So security and privacy is maintained in products like that. I can't speak for every single product, but I do know that when ML is in place, we do need the relevant data, but it's not going to be like, we're not actually using the actual user information. It's just more of understanding the metadata. But again, depends product to product and how companies use it. Yeah, so that's what I could say. But I know this is an area that every company is actually trying to shine some light on, just because it's very important to make sure that privacy is maintained.
Cool. Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for answering that. Does anyone else have any question? I think we might have time for one question before we sort of like go into the networking portion. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to post it in the chat. And then we'll sort of like take it from there. Otherwise, again, thank you so much. Like I've learned a ton for a lot of the insights that you provided. We would definitely be like, summarizing a lot of these talks and like sharing it like in like a blog post. So really do appreciate taking the time to speak with us. So don't be shy. Any last call for questions? Otherwise, happy to move into the networking portion of the event. Okay, there's one more question from Greg, so thank you for that. Outside from the data scientist teams that you need for an ML project, is it expensive? Does ML require intensive computing processing power? Also another great question, Greg. So could you touch on this, Annie, a little bit?
Yeah, just this really depends on like the type of problem you're solving. It definitely does require a lot of computing processing power. And again, like depends on how much data are you working with, what are you trying to solve, how many models, like for example, if it's just a single model, like depends versus like many models. Case to case, this would change. When it's like a simple machine learning problem, probably not. Again, there are various solutions to solve this. So you don't be afraid. It might be a little costly, but yeah, it's definitely don't be afraid of that to kick off your ML journey.
Cool. Well, thank you so much once again. I really do appreciate you joining us today, Annie. So now we'll be moving on to the networking portion of the event. So I'm going to open a few breakout rooms. Feel free to hop in. Otherwise, you're welcome to also like exit the call. You can like reflect on the call here. You can network with one another, exchange LinkedIn's, or just like share your learnings. Otherwise, thank you so much, Annie, for taking time to speak with us today. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be following up with you in email in the next couple of days. So have a good rest of your day. We are also welcome to stay for networking if you like. Otherwise, have a good one.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, everyone.